I thought the sound was a really interesting addition.
Now, did he see the imagery while he was doing that?
No. I just, a lot of the way that I work with video, even starting with this piece, is just doing, recording a lot of sounds, recording a lot of video, and then when I'm working, it's almost like a painterly process with the video.
You put them together.
Layering and subtracting, yeah. But it was interesting to me because it had this kind of digital analog kind of ambiguity, I guess. A little bit like the piece, it has hand-drawn elements, but then as it mirrors, it sort of pixelates and starts to move towards this very different kind of language than what is presented at the beginning.
Okay, so let's move on. This is during your one of your residencies at the UCross Foundation. Where is that located?
It's in Wyoming. It's a really beautiful, amazing residency. If all artists in the audience, I really recommend applying there. But this was actually the first piece that started me thinking about making animations, was this piece called If I'm Thinking, I'm Probably Feeling. And so the piece was started at UCross and then finished at the residency in Roswell.
And what are we seeing in the image there on your wall? It seems to be something in progress.
Yeah, it's in progress. The idea for the piece was was based on a poem that my brother wrote called If I'm Thinking, I'm Probably Feeling. Actually, the poem was called Hair, but that was a line from the poem. And he was imagining what it would be like, this idea that if you're decapitated, your head, you remain conscious for 15 seconds. And so he was thinking about what he would want his head to be doing in that 15 seconds. And he finally settled on that he'd want it to land in a catapult right as he was decapitated, and then the catapult to launch his head into the air so that he would be in this sort of open-ended arc of flying as he ceased to exist. And the poem was beautiful and really funny, and I thought really interesting that someone that was 18 years old is already sort of thinking about this kind of thing. So
well, he practiced meditation when he was young.
Yeah. So I videotaped him reading the poem and then broke the video into an image sequence, made paintings from that sequence, and I thought it might be interesting if in the animation there was a sort of virtual decapitation or a metaphorical decapitation that came from the frame of the painting or the frame of the video. And so in the finished piece, you saw all of the paintings that made up the animation, which I think were about 530, in a giant grid, kind of reverberating grid, and then there was this single animation based on all the paintings. So the viewer stood in between the same event, in one way expressed spatially.
One like a storyboard, really. Yeah.
Spatially and temporally, and you could kind of move between those two experiences.
And I guess this is moving into the Roswell studio there.
And another piece that was a different piece, the piece actually that the museum has in its
Which we're going to talk about in a minute.
But a different piece, but a similar kind of process. So you can see, as I worked on the paintings, I tacked them into this giant grid so I could kind of see how they were coming along.
And then you showed them together.
Yeah, I showed them together. The sort of the show that was the culmination of that year of work in Roswell was at Women in Their Work in Austin, and the show was called Wide Open Wide.
Which brings us to the work that we're proud to call part of the SAMA collection, and we're also very, very pleased that we own one of the watercolors that was used for the animation as well as the animation itself. And before we talk about it, why don't we watch it? So that was basically completed during your residency, and there I know there were a number of things influencing you, both where you were at the time and various other resources or sources. You want to tell us about those influences?
Yeah, I mean, as I was watching it, I was thinking that when I started that year in Roswell, I didn't know what this piece was going to be, and so I was spending a lot of time in nature because there are these beautiful bird sanctuary there, and the skies in New Mexico are really beautiful. And I was also having friends like my friend Tommy. I was asking them to sort of perform different things, sort of like the finger sucking, except in this case I was asking him to scream. I was asking people to scream in different ways, which also is kind of a self-conscious thing. You know, asking someone to scream all of a sudden on camera is a sort of a weird thing, and it elicited all kinds of different responses. But in the end, I felt like the piece became this kind of cycle of rest in the first section, and then this kind of synchronized, just like powerful activity in the middle section. And then in the last section, when Tommy screams and it sort of tears this portal to the universe, is how I was thinking about it. It was inspired by a story from the Bhagavad Gita where Krishna's foster mother pries his mouth open when she thinks he's stolen some butter, and when she opens his mouth, she sees the universe inside, and she realizes that he's, not an angry toddler, that he's a god, And so there are, in many religions, there are beautiful stories of, and really sort of visual stories of bodily transcendence, and connecting us to the universe. So that was the inspiration for the last portion.
Okay, we have another video to show you. I could just keep watching it. I mean, it's transfixing. So, but as I was watching it, though, Joey, I mean, I was just thinking about the whole history of portraiture, and how artists throughout history have tried to paint, and now in a new form in animation and video, what it is to be human, and how in this short loop, again, that can go on forever and you don't tire of it. It dialogues. It speaks to us about, first of all, like the whole range of human emotions that you see going on in his face, and then, meditation, the connection to the metaphysical zone, and then back to the more material world, and how you managed to, it's a brilliant piece, and just how you've managed to, capture that in the way that Rembrandt would have done that in a different way in his day. But so, I mean, I see it really fitting into a long line of artists who want to, paint what it is or make art about what it is just to be human.
Well, it's a beautiful thing to say. Thank you for in any way tangentially connecting me to Rembrandt. I was going to say, that's beautiful. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, I was just going to say with that piece, like I actually sliced the painting on the sides of the head, and I had the blue bars, which I would stick through the center to create that effect of that sort of flowing blue. And I think one thing that's specific to my process is that I never took any video in school, so it's a completely kind of self-taught process. So a lot of the solutions that I came up with were things that had to do more with the hand and more with sort of a painter's solution versus a digital solution. And the sound is like that as well. Those are the sounds of just like me breathing and snapping and patting around, played backwards and forwards and like changing the speed. So I think that's
what a composer does.
yeah.
Okay, so and then these are both right now stills from 2 more videos, and we're going to watch an excerpt from Get Naked. That's the end of it. Okay, so tell us a little bit about that one. This is the first time that you combined the animation with the actual video footage.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I got a grant from the wonderful San Antonio Artists Foundation, which enabled me to make that piece because I was able to buy a new, much more powerful computer and software that I needed. So thank you again to them. But that was an important piece for a couple of reasons. It was the first time my dad had scored the piece. Before I had used his music in a lot of different ways, but with this piece, when I finished it, my dad is a wonderful musician, and he's done a lot of film scores and music for TV shows and that kind of thing. So he did the music, and it was the first time that I'd incorporated animation and live action footage. So all the film footage in this piece is 16 millimeter and 8 millimeter film footage shot by my dad in the 60s, and then also my grandfather on their like family vacations. So that was, and especially in that end sequence where Tommy's tilted back like that on that sort of shimmery water that starts to sort of kaleidoscope itself. I loved the quality of that degraded film footage and its painterly quality and how it integrated what I felt like was really beautifully with the painting. And so that was a real turning point in terms of thinking about how live action and painting could come together in a harmonious way, or in a way that felt right to me.
Okay, then some events in your life that I guess you'll share with us now.
Just a very important, huge events. So I got married to my wonderful husband Riley, who's also an artist, and we had our first son Brendan, who's that chill little guy right there, and then I just added, you have these sort of experiences that become turning points, or really powerful experiences. And I took a trip with my parents for the funeral of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi to India, and I'd never been there before, and it was just an amazing trip that I think continues to inform a lot of the things that I'm thinking about. So I added those.
And tell us about this as a two-person show.
This was a show that Riley and I had like 2 weeks after Brendan was born, so it really marked the kind of theme of our lives of integration of life and art. We had like Brendan and the baby Bjorn right there with us, but the show was called Fields and Monuments, and it was a series of paintings that I was doing, sort of trying to push that idea of how we transcend our bodies and can integrate into the landscape, like where Tommy like fades into the water. I thought, what would the far extreme of that be, and how could that be expressed visually? So I did a series of these grass paintings. They almost were like these kind of sculptural, sort of pornographic topiaries, the sort of the grass, not completely pornographic, but they definitely had this kind of sensual quality of the grass, almost like that, I don't know, having some folding back on itself in some way. So those are what those paintings are. And then in the foreground is Riley's beautiful sculpture based on Tatlin's
I was going to
tower.
say, I could think of Tatlin when I look at it.
And it has a train that circles all the way, a moving train. It's a really, really cool piece.
Mm-hmm. And then, let's see, tell us about, this is a detail of another work. I think we have a couple details, do we not, from this?
Yeah, you can move.
So this reminds me of the early wallpaper works that you were doing.
Yeah, and the work is basically chronological, but I have a few themes that I move between that I tend to come back to. And a lot of sometimes the work is spurred on by what I find, like with the Ann Biggie drawings. And this was the next wallpaper piece I did after that first piece in the Gibbs building many years before was this very long piece, because I found this incredible antique scenic wallpaper at a tiny little antique place in Ucross in Wyoming. So I did this piece for a show at Art House that was a painting show called The Siren Song. And it was a long piece that sort of had these very different realities, some kind of apocalyptic, some, kind of, joyous, all sort of spread out into this long narrative. So it's kind of almost like a filmic narrative because the piece was about 2.5 feet high, but it was 12 feet long, or a little over 12 feet long.
And it's interesting because I think some of the next videos we're going to see, this kind of landscape seems to become real in those.
Yeah, it's actually the same. Some of the same elements used in these paintings are used in some of the animations.
And tell us about this series, which you, I believe, exhibited here at David Shelton Gallery.
I did, yeah. This was a series of big photographic collage prints that I showed about a year ago, that I made about a year ago. And, again, exploring some of the same ideas of these kind of figures, these, having these kind of transcendent experiences, so much so that it almost becomes a little bit funny, which was intentional. It's almost sort of over the top in terms of the romanticism of the images. But I was interested in how the environments informed how we read the figures and vice versa. And so I was trying to do some of the same things I was doing it with painting, only with photography and collage.
Which then leads us to the next video we're going to show, which was also shown, I believe, in that exhibition.
Yeah. It was first shown in Chicago, and then I've actually shown it a few places. But yeah, I showed it with David and at Box 13 in Houston.
And where was it shot?
Well, it was shot. That wallpaper. It's what you'll see when you watch the video. It's like a virtual stage. There are about 15 layers of video. The figures were shot on a green screen, and the other elements were constructed digitally out of hand-painted elements and collaged elements from the wallpaper.
Beautiful. Okay, we're going to watch this one in its entirety. So you've taken